Sometimes the richest man holds the emptiest heart. Sometimes the poorest orphan carries the richest soul. And sometimes a single dance can teach a billionaire a lesson no fortune could ever buy. The city sparkled at night, but in the tallest corner stood a mansion that glowed brighter than the stars. It belonged to Richard Hale, a billionaire whose empire stretched across continents. People called him a king of steel, a man who bent the world with money. But behind the golden gates of his mansion, there was no laughter. There was no warmth, only silence. Richard was not always so cold. Years ago, his wife had died in a car accident, leaving him alone with his daughter, Clara. She was his only light. But tragedy followed again. An illness left Clara paralyzed from the waist down when she was just 11. Doctors tried everything. Millions were spent. But nothing changed her fate. Clara had once been a lively child who danced in the garden every morning. Her laughter used to echo across the marble halls of the mansion. Now she sat in her wheelchair, staring out of her window with eyes that held no spark. She stopped speaking much. She stopped smiling. Her world had turned gray. Richard buried himself in work. He thought if he made more money, if he built bigger empires, maybe one day science could save his daughter. But in truth, he was running away, running from guilt, running from the pain of watching his little girl fade into silence. The mansion was filled with servants, guards, and luxury, yet it was the loneliest place in the city. Clara rarely left her room, and Richard rarely sat with her. He loved her, more than life, yet he didn't know how to heal her broken spirit. One evening, Clara sat by her window, watching the world outside. It was a full moon night. The streets beyond the mansion gates looked alive. Cars passed, people laughed, and then something unusual caught her eye. Under the flickering street lamp stood a boy, barefoot, thin, his clothes torn. But his eyes burned with fire. He began to move. He began to dance. There was no music, only the sound of his feet hitting the pavement. But his movements told a story. Every step was sharp, every spin carried emotion, every jump seemed to defy the weight of his poverty. He was an orphan named Aiden, though Clara didn't know it yet. Clara leaned closer to the window. Her heart skipped. For the first time in months, she felt something stirring inside her. Hope. The boy danced as if the world didn't matter, as if hunger didn't hurt, as if loneliness didn't exist. His body became his voice, his rhythm became his escape. Clara's lips curved into the faintest smile. It was fragile, like the first petal of spring after a long winter. Her nurse noticed and gasped softly. It had been so long since Clara smiled. "Who is he?" Clara whispered. The nurse shook her head. "Just a poor boy from the streets, miss." But Clara's eyes never left him. She clapped softly. The boy didn't hear, but in her heart she felt as though he was dancing just for her. That night she couldn't sleep. She kept replaying his movements in her mind, the strength in his steps, the freedom in his eyes. She whispered to herself, "I wish I could dance like that again." The next night, the boy returned. Again, he danced under the street lamp. Again, Clara watched. Again, she smiled. Night after night, this secret continued. The girl in the mansion and the boy on the street. Two souls from two different worlds connected by rhythm, but fate never hides forever. One evening, Richard Hale returned earlier than usual. His limousine slowed at the mansion gates. And there, he saw the boy. The headlights illuminated Aiden's movements. The guards tensed. Richard's eyes narrowed. His jaw clenched. "Who is that?" he demanded. The guards rushed forward, ready to chase the boy away. But before they could, Clara's voice broke through the air. "No, father! Please, don't hurt him!" Everyone froze. It had been so long since Clara spoke with such urgency. "Richard, turned, shocked. His daughter's eyes were alive, brighter than he had seen in years, but his heart was torn. To him, the boy was nothing more than a trespasser, a danger. Yet to Clara, this boy was something else. Something priceless. Richard stepped out of the car. His shoes hit the gravel sharply. He approached the boy, his presence heavy like a storm. Aiden froze. The rhythm in his body halted. He looked up at the towering man in a suit worth more than his entire life. "Why are you here?" Richard's voice was sharp. Aiden swallowed hard. I dance," he whispered. "This is not your stage," Richard growled. Aiden's voice shook, but his eyes held firm. "It's the only stage I have." The guards grabbed him by the arms. Clara gasped from the balcony. "Father, please," she cried. Richard turned, torn between anger and his daughter's plea. In that moment, something stirred inside him. He had not seen his daughter this alive in years, and it was because of this boy, this orphan, this dancer. But Richard was not a man who trusted easily. He carried suspicion like armor. He carried pride like a shield. He could not let go of control so easily. He looked at Aiden again. There was dirt on his face, hunger in his body. But there was fire in his eyes. A fire Richard had not seen even in himself for a long time. "Bring him inside," Richard finally ordered. The guards hesitated, shocked. But his voice left no room for argument. Aiden was dragged past the iron gates into the world of gold he had never dreamed of touching. Clara's heart pounded with joy. The boy who had given her hope from afar was now inside her home. But she didn't know that this was only the beginning. The mansion of silence was about to awaken, and the billionaire who thought he needed no one was about to learn a lesson he could never forget. The heavy doors of the Hale mansion creaked open as Aiden was pulled inside. His bare feet sank into marble floors polished like mirrors. Crystal chandeliers glowed above him. Golden frames lined the walls, portraits of ancestors who looked down. With cold, judging eyes, Aiden felt like a shadow in a kingdom of light. The guards pushed him forward. He stumbled, almost falling. But when he lifted his head, he saw her. Clara. She sat in her wheelchair at the center of the grand hall. Her hands gripped the armrests, her eyes wide with excitement. Her lips trembled, as though she wanted to laugh and cry at the same time. "You're here," she whispered. The boy froze. He hadn't expected to be seen, to be welcomed by anyone in this palace of glass. Richard entered behind him, his footsteps echoing like thunder. He dismissed the guards with a wave. They bowed and left, leaving only the billionaire, his daughter, and the orphan. Silence stretched. It was the kind of silence that pressed against the chest, heavy and suffocating. Richard's voice cut through it. "Who are you?" His tone was sharp, commanding, the voice of a man who had built empires. Aiden swallowed. "My name is Aiden, sir." Richard's eyes narrowed. "No parents?" "No, sir. They're gone." "School?" Aiden shook his head. "I work. I dance for coins. It's all I know." Richard studied him like one might study an insect, curious but detached. But Clara leaned forward. Her eyes sparkled. "He's the boy I told you about, Father. The one outside my window. He makes me smile." Her voice cracked on the last word. For Richard, it was like a dagger. How long had it been since he had heard his daughter speak with joy? But his pride rose like a wall. He would not let an orphan, a street boy, enter their lives so easily. "You dance," Richard said coldly. "Show me." Aiden hesitated. The marble floor stretched before him like a stage built for kings. His heart pounded. This was not the street, not the flickering lamp. This was the world of giants. But Clara's eyes urged him on. Slowly, Aiden took his position. He closed his eyes. The silence of the hall became his music. And then he moved. His feet slid across the floor with grace that didn't belong to his ragged clothes. His arms cut through the air like wings breaking free. Every step carried hunger, pain, hope. He spun, jumped, landed with precision that came not from training, but from survival. Clara gasped. Her hands clapped together uncontrollably. Tears filled her eyes. It was like watching freedom itself dance. Even Richard's stern gaze faltered. For a moment he saw not a poor boy, but an artist, a soul unbroken by life's cruelty. But he quickly masked his thoughts. When Aiden stopped, his chest heaving, silence returned. Clara broke it with trembling words. "Father, do you see? He's not just a boy. He's hope." Richard turned away. Hope was a word that had abandoned him long ago. That night, Aiden was given food. The servants sneered at him as they set down plates, golden forks beside silver bowls. Aiden stared. At the meal, his hands trembling. He had never seen so much food in one place. He ate quietly, aware of every eye watching him. Clara rolled her wheelchair closer. "Do you always dance at night?" she asked softly. Aiden nodded. "It's the only time the streets are quiet, the only time I feel free." Clara's eyes lowered. "I used to dance too." Her voice cracked. "But now I can only watch." The boy looked at her, really looked at her. Her fragile frame, her useless legs, her longing eyes, and something stirred inside him. "Then I'll dance for you," he said simply, "every night, until you smile again." Clara's lips parted, her heart thudded. For the first time in years, she felt not like a prisoner in her wheelchair, but like someone still alive. From that night on, Aiden returned to the mansion, not as a guest, not yet as family, but as something in between. Clara waited eagerly for him each evening, and when he danced, the marble halls of silence filled with life. But Richard watched from the shadows. Suspicion gnawed at him. Why did this boy affect his daughter so deeply? What was it about this orphan that pierced through walls money could not touch? One evening, Richard summoned his head of security. "I want everything on that boy," he ordered. "Where he comes from, who he knows, every detail." The next day, the report arrived. The truth made Richard pause. Aiden had no family, no home. He had grown up in an orphanage, left when he was 12, surviving on streets since. He danced for coins, begged for food, slept under bridges. He had nothing. Richard closed the file. He should have felt superior, victorious in comparison. But instead, he felt a strange ache. For all his billions, he had never seen such resilience. Meanwhile, Clara's health seemed to shift. Doctors noticed her spirit rising. Her laughter returned. Her voice carried hope. "Whatever you're doing, Mr. Hale, keep it up," the physician said. Richard didn't correct him. How could he admit it was not medicine, but a poor orphan's dance that was healing his daughter's heart? Yet not all was calm. One evening, as Aiden finished a performance, Richard stepped into the hall. "Enough," he said firmly. Both Aiden and Clara looked at him in shock. "Father, please," Clara began. But Richard raised a hand. "This boy is not a solution. He is a distraction. You need doctors, not dreams. Hope will not cure you." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "You don't understand. He makes me feel alive again." Her voice broke, but Richard's face remained stone. Aiden looked between them. His heart thudded with fear. He could be thrown back to the streets in an instant. But then, something inside him refused to stay silent. "Sir," Aiden said quietly, "I may not be able to heal her body, but I can heal her spirit. Isn't that worth something?" The words struck like lightning. Richard froze. Clara gasped. For a moment, the mighty billionaire had no reply. The silence stretched. Then Richard turned sharply and left the hall. But in his chest, for the first time in years, he felt the crack of doubt in his armor. The next morning, the mansion buzzed with quiet tension. Servants whispered about the boy. Some mocked him, others feared him. But everyone knew one thing. He had stirred something inside Clara, something even the finest doctors couldn't awaken. Richard Hale, however, stood at his office window, staring at the city below. His empire sprawled in glass towers and steel bridges, yet his heart was restless. Could it be true that an orphan's dance had done more for his daughter than all his wealth? No, it couldn't be. It mustn't be. That evening, Richard called for Aiden. The boy entered nervously, barefoot as always. The chandelier above glistened, casting shadows on his tired face. "You dance well," Richard began, his tone unreadable. "But life is not about dance. Life is about survival, about strength, about earning what you deserve." Aiden said nothing. His eyes remained steady, though his stomach twisted. Richard continued. "If you are to step foot in my house again, you will prove yourself, not through dance, but through discipline." Clara, who was listening from her wheelchair, gasped. "Father, please don't—" Richard's hand rose. "This is not cruelty. This is truth. If he is to be near you, he must show he is more than performance." Aiden finally spoke, his voice calm but firm. "Sir, I've survived the streets since I was 12. Every day is a test. If you want me to prove myself, I will." Richard's lips curved into the faintest shadow of a smile. "Then tomorrow, you will begin." The next day, Aiden was led to the mansion gardens. It was a vast maze of trimmed hedges, marble fountains, and roses that seemed to bloom forever. Richard stood with folded arms, watching. "You will work here today," Richard said. "No music, no dance, just labor. If you cannot respect work, you do not deserve to step in this house again." The servants smirked. They thought the street boy would fail. But Aiden bent down, his hands touching the earth. He began pulling weeds, trimming, carrying water. The sun burned overhead, sweat dripping down his face, his back aching. But he did not stop. Clara watched from her balcony, her heart aching. She wanted to shout, to beg her father to stop, but Aiden looked up at her once, gave a small smile, and kept working. Hours passed. By dusk, the boy had cleaned the entire section of the garden with his bare hands. Richard inspected the work. His eyes betrayed a flicker of surprise. The hedges were neat, the earth was fresh, the roses looked brighter. "Not bad," he muttered. "But one day of work proves nothing." Aiden only bowed his head. "I'll return tomorrow." The following evening, Richard invited Aiden to dine with him and Clara. The long golden table, stretched endlessly, filled with dishes from every corner of the world. Lamb roasted in herbs, bread soft as clouds, cakes dripping with sugar. Aiden's eyes widened. Richard watched him closely. This was no ordinary dinner. It was a test. "Eat," Richard said. Aiden picked up the silver fork awkwardly. He ate slowly, carefully, though hunger clawed at his insides. Every bite was savored, every swallow restrained. He did not devour. He did not grab. He ate with quiet dignity. Clara noticed. Her eyes softened. Her father noticed too. When the plates were cleared, Richard asked, "Do you always eat so little?" Aiden looked down. "I eat what I need. On the streets, if you take too much today, you may have nothing tomorrow." The words sank into Richard's chest. For a moment, silence hung heavy. Then he said, almost reluctantly, "You passed." 1 week later, Richard called for Aiden again. This time, he stood in the great hall with Clara by his side. The moonlight streamed through tall windows, casting silver across the floor. "You say dance is your freedom," Richard said. "Tonight, prove it. Dance not for coins, not for survival. Dance for truth. Dance for something greater than yourself." Aiden's chest tightened. Truth. What truth did he carry that these golden walls could ever understand? He closed his eyes. The silence wrapped around him. Then his feet moved. This time, his dance was not sharp. It was raw. Every movement carried memory. He danced the pain of hunger, the loneliness of nights under bridges, the fear of never belonging. But he also danced the fire of survival, the hope that refused to die, the dream of a boy who wanted to rise. Clara's tears flowed freely. Her hands clutched her chest. She whispered, "Beautiful." Richard's jaw tightened. For the first time, he felt something stirring that money could not buy. Respect, admiration, and a strange sense of shame. When Aiden stopped, the hall was silent. No applause, no words, just the echo of truth hanging in the air. Finally, Richard spoke. "You carry more inside you than I expected." His voice was softer than before. "But don't think this means you belong here. This house is not a shelter. You must prove your worth every day." Clara's voice broke through, strong and clear. "Father, he already has." Richard looked at his daughter. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes alive. It had been years since she looked so radiant. And deep down, Richard knew she was right. But pride was a heavy chain. He turned away, hiding the storm in his chest. Yet that night, as he sat alone in his office, Richard whispered to himself, "Why does this boy remind me of something I lost?" Days turned into weeks. Aiden became a quiet presence in the mansion. He danced for Clara, worked in the gardens, read books from the library at night when no one was watching. The servants grew curious. Some mocked him less. Some even began to respect him. Clara's health improved. Not her legs, but her spirit. She laughed more. She talked more. She even began practicing small arm movements with Aiden, pretending to dance with him from her wheelchair. Richard saw it all. But instead of joy, he felt conflict. A voice inside him whispered, "This boy is dangerous. Not dangerous like a thief or an enemy, but dangerous to his pride, dangerous to the wall he had built around his heart." One night, as rain lashed against the mansion windows, Richard stood in his study. The fire crackled in the hearth. He poured himself a glass of wine but didn't drink. Instead, he stared into the flames and whispered, "What am I so afraid of?" He didn't know yet, but soon he would. Because fate was about to test not the orphan, but the billionaire himself. The rain poured over the city like the sky itself was weeping. Inside the Hale mansion, Clara sat by her window, waiting for Aiden. But that night, he didn't come. Her heart twisted with worry. He never missed, not once. Hours later, the sound of shouting rose at the gates. Richard, awakened by the commotion, stormed down the grand staircase. The guards dragged Aiden inside, his clothes torn, his face bruised, his eyes filled with defiance. "What happened?" Clara cried. The guard explained. "We caught him near the back entrance. He was meeting someone in secret." Richard's eyes darkened. "Who?" The guard hesitated. "A man. From the streets. Looked rough. They exchanged words, but when we approached, the boy resisted." Richard's suspicion hardened into steel. "I knew it. He doesn't belong here. He's using us!" "No!" Clara shouted, tears streaming. Aiden would never... But her father silenced her with a raised hand. He turned to the boy. "Explain yourself. Aiden's chest heaved. I wasn't stealing. I wasn't lying. That man, he knew my parents. He told me the truth I've searched for all my life. The room froze. Clara's breath caught. Even Richard's heart skipped. What truth? He demanded. Aiden's voice broke. My parents didn't abandon me. They were murdered. And the man who killed them was one of your business partners. The words struck like thunder. Silence crashed through the hall. Richard's face went pale. Clara gasped, covering her mouth. It can't be, Richard whispered, but Aiden's eyes burned with fury. I grew up believing I was unwanted, but now I know. I was silenced. My family was silenced, and all for power, for money, for people like you. His voice echoed through the golden hall, shaking its very foundations. Richard staggered back. For years, he had ignored the corruption around him. He had built empires with men whose hands were not clean. And now, the truth stood before him, in the form of a boy who had suffered because of it. Clara's tears fell freely. Father, is it true? Richard couldn't answer. The weight of guilt pressed down like chains. He remembered the whispers. Years ago, the rumors of a deal gone wrong, a family that disappeared. He had turned his back then. He had told himself it wasn't his problem. But deep down, he had always known. The storm outside grew fiercer. Lightning split the sky. And in that moment, Richard Hale realized he was not just a prisoner of his wealth. He was a prisoner of his silence. The next day, Aiden prepared to leave. I won't stay where the ghosts of my parents' killers still linger, he said quietly. Clara clutched his hand, sobbing. Please, don't go. You're all I have. Aiden's eyes softened. You'll always have me here, he said, pressing her hand against his chest. But I can't stay in this mansion built on blood. Richard stood nearby, his face drawn, his shoulders heavy. For the first time in decades, he looked old. His empire, his fortune, his pride. None of it could shield him from the truth. Wait, he said, his voice trembling. If what you say is true, then I have failed not only as a man, but as a father. Aiden turned, his eyes fierce. Then do something. Stop hiding behind money. Face the men who destroyed my life. The words struck deep. Richard had built walls his whole life, but now those walls cracked. He saw his daughter's broken body, his lost laughter, the boy's stolen childhood, and he knew this was his moment. That evening, Richard called a meeting with his board of directors. Men in suits, powerful and smug, filled the long table. But this time, Richard's eyes were sharp with fire. You think you own the world, he said coldly. You think money buries truth, but I will not stand with murderers any longer. One man shifted uncomfortably, his face pale. The same man Aiden had pointed to in the report. Richard slammed his fist on the table. You killed them! For land! For greed! And you thought no one would ever know! The room erupted in chaos. But Richard's voice cut through like a blade. From this moment, our partnership is over, and tomorrow the world will know what you did. Gasps filled the room. The accused man stuttered, his mask breaking. You'll ruin yourself, Hale! Richard's voice rose with thunder. No, I will free myself! When Richard returned home, Clara was waiting. Her eyes searched his face. What did you do, father? I chose truth, he said simply. For the first time in years, I chose what was right, not what was easy. Aiden stood silently, his chest heavy with emotions he couldn't name. He wanted justice. He wanted peace. But more than that, he wanted to believe. Richard stepped closer to him. I cannot undo your suffering. I cannot bring back your parents. But I can fight for you now, if you'll let me. For the first time, Aiden saw not the cold billionaire. but a broken man seeking redemption. Clara smiled through her tears. Then maybe we can heal together. That night, Clara asked Aiden to dance one last time before sleep. He hesitated, then nodded. As he moved, Clara raised her arms, copying him from her wheelchair. Their laughter filled the mansion, echoing off walls that once only knew silence. Richard watched from the shadows. Tears glistened in his eyes. For years he thought money was power, but now he understood. Power was in truth. Power was in love. And power was in the courage of a boy who had nothing, yet gave everything. But outside the mansion, in the stormy streets, danger still lingered. The man Richard had exposed would not stay silent. Revenge was brewing. And soon, the Hale family would face a test greater than any before. The storm that had shaken the mansion seemed to calm, but in the city, darker clouds gathered. Richard Hale had exposed a powerful man, a man who thrived on corruption, a man who would not forgive. Whispers spread through the business world like fire. Some called Richard brave, others called him a fool, but Richard no longer cared. For the first time in years, his heart beat with conviction. Clara noticed the change in him. When he came into her room, his smile was no longer forced. His eyes were softer. He spoke to her not as a burden, but as his greatest treasure. She felt alive again. And Aiden, the boy who had once been just a shadow under a street lamp, now stood as part of their family. But peace never lasts unchallenged. It was midnight when the mansion alarms rang. Guards rushed to the gates. Engines roared outside. Men in black stormed the grounds. The man Richard had betrayed had come for revenge. "Protect Clara," Richard roared. The mansion shook with chaos. Servants screamed. Glass shattered. The intruders forced their way in. Clara clutched her wheelchair, trembling. Aiden stood in front of her like a shield. His fists clenched, his heart pounding. The attackers burst into the hall. Richard fought alongside his guards, but they were outnumbered. One man charged toward Clara. Aiden sprang forward, blocking him. He fought with the rhythm of survival, the rhythm of the streets. Every move was like a dance, swift and sharp, born from years of hardship. He dodged, he struck, he protected. But the men were many. And he was only one. "Father!" Clara screamed. Richard turned, his eyes blazing. He rushed to his daughter, pulling her close, shielding her with his own body. But in that moment, one of the attackers drew a weapon. Time slowed. The barrel pointed toward Clara. Richard's heart stopped, and then Aiden moved. He leapt forward, his body cutting through the air like one final dance. The shot rang out. Aiden fell. Clara's scream pierced the night. "No!" The attackers fled as guards swarmed in, but the damage was done. Aiden lay on the marble floor, blood staining his shirt. Richard dropped to his knees beside him. Clara wheeled forward, tears pouring down her face. "Aiden, please, don't leave me." The boy's lips curved into a weak smile. His voice trembled. "I told you. I would dance for you until you smiled again." Her sobs shook the air. "You can't leave. Not now. You're my only hope." Richard's hands shook as he pressed against the wound, desperate. "Stay with us, son. Stay." Aiden's fading eyes met his. "Son," he whispered. The words struck Richard's heart like lightning. For the first time, someone without blood had called. "Him, father." Aiden's breath grew shallow, but even in pain, he lifted his hand weakly. He moved his fingers as though dancing one last time, and then his hand dropped. Clara screamed. Richard's tears fell onto the boy's face. For the first time in his life, the billionaire sobbed, not for loss of wealth, but for loss of love. Hours later, the mansion was quiet again. The attackers had been caught. The corrupt man was arrested. But the silence was heavy, heavy with grief. Clara sat by Aiden's side, her small hands holding his lifeless one. Richard stood behind her, his eyes hollow. But in that silence, something unexpected happened. Clara's body trembled. Her hands clenched the armrests of her wheelchair, and then slowly, her legs twitched. Her father gasped. Her nurse screamed. For the first time in years, Clara's body moved. It was small, fragile, but real. Doctors later called it a miracle sparked by emotional shock. But Richard knew. It was more than science. It was Aiden's spirit. The boy's dance had awakened life not only in her soul, but in her body. Weeks passed. Clara began to regain strength, little by little. She practiced moving, standing, balancing. And every time she wobbled, she whispered his name. Aiden, this is for you. Richard changed too. He sold half his empire. He used the fortune to build homes for orphans across the city. Each one carried the name of Aiden. Each one echoed, with the laughter of children who finally had a chance. And in the grand hall of the mansion, Richard placed a single plaque. It read, "Sometimes the poorest orphan carries the richest soul. Sometimes a single dance can change the world." Every night Clara danced again, not with perfect steps, but with joy. And when she twirled, she swore she felt him there, smiling beside her. One evening, Richard stood alone in the garden. The roses swayed gently in the night breeze. He looked up at the stars and whispered, "You taught me what money never could. You taught me how to live. You taught me how to love. Thank you, my son." And in the quiet rustle of the leaves, he thought he heard the sound of footsteps, the rhythm of a dance that would never truly die.